What if I told you your body already knows how to make GLP-1, but your gut might be blocking it? And if you're taking a GLP-1 medication while your gut isn't healthy, it could seriously backfire. And this is the piece almost no one is talking about. Dr. Oscar Coetzee is a doctor of clinical nutrition who trains practitioners to use gut health and functional lab testing to address the real drivers of weight loss resistance. He's spent decades studying how the gut controls everything, your metabolism, your hunger, even your ability to release weight. And what he shares here could completely change how you approach GLP-1. I'm Elizabeth McGann, a holistic nutritionist and your guide to doing GLP-1s the right way. To take our free masterclass, How to Microdose a GLP-1 Holistically, just click the link in the episode description. From your perspective, how important is gut health as a foundation before someone even considers using something like a GLP-1?
Wow, that's a loaded question, but I will say to you that, the benefit of our industry and the benefit of what we do, you yourself in the functional space, we just learn every day, right? Every day is an awakening of new information. So I will tell you that if you asked me this question 5 years ago, just about gut health as a general rule, I would have said to you, it's the second brain in the body of the enteric nervous system. The more I dig into microbes and the specific bacteria, the more I'm starting to question that. I'm more starting to wonder if it's not the first brain communicating to what we perceive as our brain, right? Because these microbes, and we'll get into some specific microbes, but these certain microbes are so intertwined with our gut lining and the communication on receptors in our gut lining. And then those receptors communicate with our immune system, and then that immune system communicates back to our brain, and then you get that whole back and forth. It is astounding to me, and let me just explain to you from the listener's perspective. My career originally started in mental health, right? So I worked as a psychologist, and that was what my background was in. And then at a hospital that I worked at that point, there was a medical doctor there by the name of Dr. Margold. He was a psychiatrist, and this was in the 90s, and he was saying to me, hey, you might want to pursue something in the future where you look at nutritional psychology. And I mean, that was non-existent to anybody in the world, right? Looking at nutrients and mental health and proteins and mental health. And it's like, that doesn't sound like a really optimal idea, because I want to pursue my PhD in psychology. And, ironically, at that particular point, my mom got ill, and then you change your path, right? And all of a sudden, this became fruitful for me. And then in the next 5 to 10 years post that period, I started to really look at nutrients associated with mental health, So, if a person has anemia, if they have a low vitamin D status, if they have low vitamin C, if they have low B vitamins, these could all correlate to what we will perceive as anxiety and depression symptomology. And that's how I got deeper into the microbiome, right? Understanding that certain bacteria produce these little aromatic amino acids that we call tryptophan and tyrosine and phenylalanine, and then they convert to serotonin and dopamine, and then all of a sudden that thing just open up a whole wide spectrum of microbes. So that's my original interest in microbes. Turn that a couple of years forward, where I started in my clinical practice to specialize in metabolic syndrome, prediabetes, weight loss resistance, things like lipedema. Started looking at the microbiome as it relates to weight loss resistance, cravings, overeating, undereating. The next thing that you discover is that wow, the body actually has very natural capacity, getting back to your GLP-1 intro, of making GLP-1s in the gut.
Yes.
Wow, that's interesting. And it doesn't just have one area. There's about 5 to 6 areas in the gut that actually makes GLP-1s naturally. And for the listeners, I can go into each one of those specifically, but the key idea behind this is the bacteria in your gut, they produce these little short-chain fatty acids, which is this cohesive relationship. And then these short-chain fatty acids attach to these epithelial layers where we have these receptors. And then these receptors is what activates our body to produce natural GLP-1. So people would say, well, why would we do that? Well, we lived in a world in the old days where you didn't have a lot of food, so you ended up eating more fiber. And one of the key factors to creating GLP-1 production by the bacteria breaking down things is fiber. So literally, that's the connection between fiber and satiety and weight loss, is because it actually activates these GLP-1 receptors in our bodies, which is natural satiety hormones as well, right?
Yeah. Oh gosh, there's so many places we can go. So what you're describing, I love your background too, and I want to get more into that. You're such a full person. You're a multidimensional person. We can't just put you in one box, and I love that. The microbiome as the first brain is fascinating, and also as an ecosystem. I was recently doing an educational series and just really understanding it that way, and it was so fascinating. Can you speak a little bit more to that ecosystem and how a fully healthy gut can help you manage your weight and release GLP-1?
Let's go into the ecosystem, because that's a phenomenal analogy, right? So let's go into a garden, right? And we're looking at soil, and we're looking at plants, and we're looking at fungi and bacteria and water and fertilizer and all these things. Okay. So I want you to understand that there's something that is coming on the horizon. This is a paradigm shift, even in the microbiome space, right? So we are now starting to really look more at anaerobic bacteria, which are called Keystone commensal bacteria, as the primary foundation of gut health. Okay, so everybody on the call have taken probiotics at some point in their life, and probiotics work as long as you take them. Once you stop taking the probiotics, because they're transient in nature, they don't engraft, they don't blossom in your gut, they stop having the efficacy, right? So there are hundreds and thousands of studies, just going back to the Mental Health Association, that show that bifidobacterium and lactobacillus and certain strains of bacteria certainly play a role with anxiety and depression. I'm not disputing that. But what we've discovered now in the science and the research is that there are certain strains of bacteria that live endogenously in our guts. They're almost like an organ, more than a bacteria just hanging out in your gut. And these guys are really the foundation. So let's get back to our ecosystem story. So the ecosystem story with that would be the earthworms. So the earthworms are down there in the soil, and they kind of going back and forth. And there's actually 3 layers of earthworms, interestingly enough. And some of them really like to live way at the bottom, and they kind of feeding off what the others are providing them, but also providing channels of fertilizing potential and water flow as well. So it's a very cohesive, symbiotic relationship. So now you go out there and you plant your flowers and you put the fertilizer down. That would be your fiber and the foods that you're eating. But at the end of the day, what you really need down there at the bottom of the soil and the ecosystem are the earthworms. The things that are killing the earthworms in nature today would be pesticides, herbicides, chemicals, microplastics, anything that's differentiated from natural earthly evolvement would actually affect it. So now let's put that back into the human context. If you're on a processed diet, a fast food diet, you're drinking a lot of styrofoam, plastics, you're getting all that stuff in your body that is effectively destroying your ecosystem, keystone bacteria. And remember, keystone means the arch of a building, and that stone that's in the middle, if you take that stone out in the middle of the arch, the whole thing collapses, right? So if you really go deep now into the microbiome, and excuse me, I get very excited about these things.
Me too. Yeah, I love it.
They start to communicate with all the other microbes, and they do a better job. So if you have proper keystone commensals in your gut, if you're taking a probiotic of normal, traditional, transient status, it'll do a better job.
Take a probiotic. What about eating probiotic-rich foods?
Same thing. So the probiotic foods that you're eating are still going to contain the traditional transient probiotics, like an acidophilus or a bifidobacterium, the traditional aerobic bacteria. Remember, the aerobic bacteria are bacteria that can live in an oxygenated environment. So if a bacteria is alive when you put it on your mouth because it's a probiotic, it's aerobic. It's not anaerobic.
And you're talking about the anaerobics, which are the keystones. Okay, I'll let you get back to that. But you can still take probiotics and also eat them. Okay.
Oh, 100%. The probiotics do a phenomenal job on mental health, on immune health, but they are not like the real engine that drives it. So it's almost like the battery that is in your phone is the keystone commensals, right? Or the SIM card. The SIM card in the phone is the keystone commensal. The rest of the phone is all the other fancy gigs. Without the SIM card, the phone has very limited potential, correct? The SIM card is what provides it with that optimization kind of a concept. So I'm going to give you another analogy. So let's look at normal probiotics as a group of people, like all of us. We love flowers, right? The colors of flowers, the scent of flowers. It's just a beautiful thing to have in the house. So let's say we go out and we buy a bouquet of flowers and we put it in a vase. There's still going to be a psychological benefit to that because we're going to smell it. It makes the house look happy. Okay. But those flowers after 4 or 5 to 7 days will, wilt and they will die. Okay. So that is literally what a traditional probiotic is. So you have to keep bringing new flowers in, and there's nothing wrong with bringing new flowers in, but you have to keep bringing them to have the same psychological effect that you would normally have. But what if we just go plant your own flower garden outside, and then you can snip flowers from them and put it in your vase? So you have a consistent flow of these flowers that you want in your environment. So that's the whole ecosystem understanding. So Keystone bacteria, I'm growing your own flower garden. Mm-hmm. Probiotics, you buy flowers. I think you should buy flowers. It's a thing that has solved many marital problems, a bouquet of flowers, right? A relationship problem. So at the end of the day, there is a purpose. I don't want to negate the value of it. It's just that if we give you your own flower garden and you can take care of it. Now, I will say that you clearly still have to take care of it. You can't just leave it. You have to provide it with water. You have to provide it with fertilizer and the right things. So what am I saying? I'm saying if I give you a Keystone probiotic, Elizabeth, and we'll get to that in a couple of minutes, you got to do the right things to feed it, right? So you have to make sure that you're doing the right things to feed it, to keep it there, to keep your flower garden alive. So,
and let me just insert one thing, just so when people are listening, they want to know why this is so important. And you mentioned mental health and immune system health. How does this help with weight management? And why is someone, because they're listening and taking notes, but I really want to motivate people to know that if they're struggling with their weight, if they're considering a GLP-1, why doing the things you're saying are going to help them so much?
Many, many reasons. The first one and the most important one is that the bacteria that you take in your gut in the form of a probiotic, whether it's aerobic or anaerobic, okay? And there's a lot of aerobic probiotic level bacteria that actually help with eating disorder or cravings because it produces these aromatic amino acids like tryptophan, tyrosine, and phenylalanine. So let me just explain. Tryptophan would convert to serotonin, happy chemical, right? Tyrosine converts to dopamine, the overall feel-good chemical. So naturally, people would eat less starchy foods that stimulate dopaminergic effect when they have enough natural dopamine production. One of the reasons that we want more dopamine is because we're all innately dopamine addicts. If we attach to a breast at a young baby's age, we have these receptors on our tongue that taste the sweet milk from the mom, and that creates a dopamine surge. So we naturally inclined to want to have dopamine. So if you have a diet or microbes in your guts that's void of producing dopamine, your natural inclination is to eat things that produce dopamine. Now, unfortunately, high fiber vegetables don't really strike dopamine because it doesn't really get us to the point where we get that surge. That's going to be more your carbohydrates. So from a weight loss standpoint, that is the biggest connection, right? Is that you're actually working naturally with your neurotransmitters that then keeps you away from those addictive binge or comfort. Comfort is the word I was looking for, the comfort eating. That's a dopamine thing. A lot of people that tell me that's my comfort food. No, it's your dopamine food. It's the food that stimulates your dopamine. Right?
So when we get the gut healthy in the ways you're describing, and I want you to expand on, it's easier to do the right things to release weight.
Correct. Okay. And if you increase your fiber, for instance, let's just chat about that as well, because this ties into the whole picture of feeding these microbes, number one, but also satiety, right? So fiber is a very, very intellectual food source for the microbes in the gut, right? Soluble, insoluble, mostly the insoluble guys is what they kind of really utilize. So the average American today is eating about 17 grams of fiber per day, okay? Just to give you an idea. Now let's go back 300 years ago, ancestrally, and even before that, the average person was eating between 80 to 150 grams of fiber a day.
Wow.
So if you're eating 17 grams of fiber a day and your microbes survive on it, you're starving them. You're literally starving them. right? If you increase your fiber intake to, let's say, a moderate 35 or 40 grams, which is kind of the recommendation, you're feeding your microbes. Now, I do understand, to all the listeners, I'm a practitioner, I get this. You can't just go do that immediately. You're going to feel bloated. You might even be more constipated. That's not the objective, right? You need to progressively increase it. But you cannot have a healthy microbiome unless you have a healthy fiber intake. And that fiber intake needs to be on a consistent basis, because it's no different for that bacteria in your gut than you going out. You haven't worked out in a year. All of a sudden you go run a marathon and you wonder why you're so sore for 3 or 4 days. The same thing for the microbiome. If you haven't eaten fiber and then you send all that fiber into those microbes, they're going to be like, man, this is Christmas. I'm going to enjoy myself. But there is residual byproducts that they produce.
So fiber is really important. Yeah. And I want you to tell us more about the anaerobic and the Keystone, but just to also let people understand, because I talk to a lot of people and sometimes they think it might be their gut, but they're not sure. How would someone know if they're having gut issues, especially women over 40 on a weight management, weight release journey? What are some of the signs that their gut isn't doing well?
Well, I'm going to give you the simple answer on that one. If you live in the United States of America, even if you don't have symptoms of a gut problem, you probably have a gut problem. Okay. Because we just don't have enough fiber, in our diet. So let's take it two ways. Let's take it from a symptom traditional base.
Yes.
What are some of the things that you can look at? If you're eating foods that bloat you, distend you, you have constipation, you have motility issues, you have skin.
Meaning you're constipated.
You're constipated, yes. You have skin issues, histamine reaction.
Okay, irritable bowel, like a combination between not going at all and then diarrhea. Correct.
Okay. When you have any kind of inconsistency like that, sometimes you get acid reflux. That could be all playing a role with the entire microbiome, gut reset kind of a thing. So yeah, that is a huge component of that. What else? What was the other question?
Well, just how do people know? And again, I want to hear about the solution. And I know people are taking notes, and guys, you should really listen, because we're going to really we are going over and we'll continue to go over some really helpful things that you can apply. How do people test for gut issues? Like how do they really know? And I know you've got a big background in functional testing, even with AI, which is so interesting.
One thing you have to understand, traditional medicine is really very good at figuring out what disease you have, right? Functional medicine is more good at figuring out, are you progressing towards a disease? I always explain it to people that disease is kind of like the red in the light. Optimal health is the green, and yellow is the limbo. So most people are kind of in the limbo. So for the limbo testing, you should go for functional testing. So if you look in your area, in California is rampant of that, right? Functional professionals, they're normally going to do a GI map or a GI-FX or some sort of a functional stool test, where you can look at the kind of how close is your gut to an optimal health status. And that test is going to evaluate how well are you breaking down fibers? Do you have enough stomach acid? Which opportunistic bacteria do you have? Opportunists are bacteria that should be there, but if they're in overgrowth, they become a problem. We want to look at your commensals, the traditional good guys, right? We want to look at your pathogens. Do you have any really bad players, in the equation? So and then some fungal assessment, and all that information is going to give a clear picture of Elizabeth's problem is starting with a fungal overgrowth, and she has 2 or 3 opportunistic bacteria. The person on the call, Joanne, might have no opportunistic bacterial overgrowth, but she's extremely low in digestive enzymes. So she suffers from something that we call dysbiosis issues, right? Or digestive dysbiosis issues. So she's just not producing enough stomach acid or pancreatic enzymes to help her break down the things to help the microbes eat them a little bit better. So if there's one key of information that you can walk away from, it's well worth it, $200 or $300 to spend on these tests. Go look at what's going on in your gut so that you can have the right approach, because the probiotics, the fiber intake, the supplement recommendation might be a little different. There's not really, apart from the anaerobes, which we'll get back to, there's not really a one-shot science in probiotic space.
And I know this is a bit of a tangent, but it's worth inserting here. Why is gut health such a blind spot in conventional medicine? I talk to a lot of people. They know it's their gut. I tell them, we got to work on your gut before the doctor's going to prescribe you a low dose GLP-1. You got to get that right. Their doctors don't even know how to really guide them there. Why is this such a blind spot?
You know what? That's a really good question. I have no idea, because if you go back to pediatric medicine in the old days, doctors used to look at poop to determine the health of a baby, right? Dogs and animals are very acutely aware of when they poop, and a lot of people are very offended by that, but the dog turns around and sniffs it and, they walk away.
Yeah.
They have a very intuitive understanding that they need to eat grass because they're constipated. You've seen that with animals. But we've completely lost that. Even in the medical community, we've lost that. And I don't know if it's an icky discussion problem or what it is, but literally we've completely lost our way there.
Yeah. I mean, the first thing I do when I went to a vet, and it wasn't even a holistic vet, I was having an issue with my dog. They're like, what are you feeding your dog? It was the first question. And I was like, this is so refreshing. Yes. What if our doctors asked us this? So someone who goes to their general practitioner and they want to test their gut, what would they ask specifically?
Well, unfortunately, I'm not sure that the general practitioner is going to know anything about these testing. And that's not to take anything away from the traditional medicine. They're just not trained in this area. So you probably want to investigate a MD or a naturopath or somebody with functional background. And there's a lot of them out there, nurse practitioners, nutritionists, or whatever. And what you need to ask them for is you want to do a functional stool test. It's that simple. I want to do a functional stool test so I can see what's going on with my gut. Even go Google functional stool test. There's a couple of laboratories that would come up, and then, they might be even able to refer you, because you need to go to a professional to get these tests done. It doesn't necessarily have to be an MD. Most registered or licensed nutritionists can do this. Even some health coaches are able to do these kinds of tests, because they're not diagnosing disease. They're diagnosing nothing but how close are you to the optimization of your health, right? And that makes them unique in that category.
Very cool. Thank you for explaining that. So I know I'm taking you all over the place. So maybe let's go into the Keystone, the solution, this anaerobic, they're microbes, bacteria. Correct. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. So let's go back a little bit in history again. Okay. So maybe this analogy works best. So if you go back maybe 500-600 years, a lot of people were running around in their guts with worms. I know that sounds disgusting. And protists. So these are very unique organisms that we don't have in our guts anymore because of sterility, antibiotics, just the whole modernization. And everybody's like, oh, thank goodness, we don't have any worms or protists in our gut. Also called helminths. There's actually therapy for some people with real gut problems to actually plant those into the gut to heal it. But let's just take a step back. So what did that cause? So let's say I remove 30% of the microbiome because of evolution or natural evolution or unnatural evolution, however you want to look at that. Now I've got this 30% space that's open in my gut. Okay. And this 30% space that's open in my gut is called a niche area. Now, one of two things can happen. Good guys can grow there, or bad guys can grow there. But why would good guys grow there if we have 17 grams of fiber a day in our diet?
Which isn't enough.
Yeah, it's going to more be the bad guys, right? Because these anaerobes, these non-anaerobic strains of opportunistic and pathogens, they don't care about anaerobic status. They can grow in oxygen, so they're good to come in with the other guys. So this is now you're going to get a fungal overgrowth, or you get people with small intestinal bowel overgrowth, all these bizarre...
SIBO.
Yeah, exactly. These bizarre bacteria that's now overgrowing in the gut. So what's the next attack? We give you more antibiotics and more antimicrobials. So what are we doing? We're just opening up the niche space again. So go back to your ecosystem analogy. So think of the gut this way. If you go to a piece of land that has been affected by pesticide or an herbicide, what is the first thing that grows back? Weeds. Right? Weeds would start coming up. Now, the interesting thing about evolution and nature is that those weeds aren't bad. Those weeds are actually coming up to reignite the soil and make the environment good again because they're very resilient, right? They can grow through roads and tarmac and things. So it's a very resilient thing. But the purpose of a weed is to go back into the soil and change the pH and bring bugs and things that can refertilize the soil. Okay. So let's say we're looking at a stool test and we're looking at opportunistic bacteria. So I don't look at bacteria in a stool test anymore. It's like, oh my goodness, you have an overgrowth of this. This is bad. I'm looking at that as a weed. Why is that weed growing there? Okay. So what's the best way to get rid of the weed? Not glyphosate, right? Not spraying it with what we think we should spray it, but you bring in other guys that start symbiotically working with them, and then you'll see the weeds start to diminish. So the gut is exactly the same thing. The answer to the problem of the small intestinal bowel overgrowth, which is kind of the weeds, right, is really to crowd them out with the good guys, not to kill them more and create more of a niche space. Do you understand? We're trying to get rid of the space that we've created in modern society.
What you said there is really profound. So instead of just trying to nuke the bad guys, we crowd them out with the good guys.
Yes. And I'm now going to tell you a very interesting story. So we've been working with anaerobic strains for several months now as a company, and myself personally. I'm very involved with the research of this. And I just published a peer-reviewed article on this. Okay. So I was working with this patient. I'm a big believer in publishing peer-reviewed case reports, right? Like real life stories. So this person came to me with severe food sensitivities, couldn't eat anything, bloated with everything, and nothing really worked, right? Because she did the traditional antimicrobial route, then felt better for a week, then, the same things came back. So I said, listen, here's the hypothesis. This is the whole story behind anaerobes. Let me give you this anaerobe. Let's see what happens, right? So we did a pre and post stool test on her. So I have the information, and this is available for anybody to go read because it's open access article. So literally, we found that she had massive overgrowth of this one opportunistic bacteria, and I gave her a very high butyrate producing anaerobic strain of bacteria. Okay. So to make a long story short, what was the most astounding thing for me is the food allergies went away, which is great, right? That's kind of the main thing that she cared about. She could now drink dairy and eat gluten and didn't have bloating or whatever. But the most astounding thing for me, Elizabeth, is that she literally, with this one strain of anaerobe, completely crowded out the opportunists that I wasn't even planning to do, right? It was just, I was trying to work with this butyrate thing to help the sensitivity of the food thing, and then this came about. So we were like, wow, this is very interesting. Let's start running more of this on more people. And this is the pattern that we're starting to see. So even in the natural way of gut treatment, you can still do antimicrobials, right? And the antimicrobials are maybe less harmful than antibiotics, but it's still creating the niche space.
I see. But can you just, antimicrobials, for people that probably don't know what that is, and that's a form of treatment, what does that mean exactly?
Call it a natural antibiotic.
Okay.
So it uses more natural things like wormwood and black walnut and garlic and, all these natural things, but they're still antimicrobial. So when you're taking an antimicrobial or an antibiotic, so look at it as a less pharmaceutically based antibiotic. And I will still use it in certain cases, but you still, look, the whole idea behind this talk today is I want people to walk away and understand that you have this gap in your gut, this niche space. You can fill it with good guys or with bad guys. It's your choice. The more antimicrobials you use, the bigger the gap gets.
I see. So instead of just trying to kill it with an antibiotic, which we can say is a true nuke, and then an antimicrobial is a more natural way of doing the same thing.
Correct.
But it causes a space, and the space itself is the problem.
Correct. In very layman's explanation, it's not like you have a centimeter space in your gut, but you understand what I'm saying. You're creating an ecosystem space in your gut. So theoretically, that's exactly what we are. So I'm telling you, and maybe it's worth nothing, but I think we're on top of a massive paradigm shift because we have now figured out as a world how to produce anaerobic bacteria in a supplement form because it was never done. And the reason for that is because anaerobes, right? So it's not liking oxygen. So you can imagine if you're making a capsule for the layperson and you're putting a powder in a capsule, you're exposing it to oxygen. As soon as you expose these things to oxygen, they die. right? So with much smarter people than myself, people with 5 pens in their pocket, standing in labs and figuring all very complicated things out, they've now figured out a way to put these things in a supplement form that we can give you the seed to put in your gut and then plant your own flower garden.
Whoa.
So that's the stepping stone that we're talking about.
That's so exciting. And I want to expand on that a little bit. Not only will that help heal their gut in a really powerful way,
Correct.
It will help them stimulate GLP-1 naturally, will help their metabolism. Why would someone want to do that on a GLP-1 journey?
Okay, so let's get right into the real deep, hardcore GLP-1 discussion now. Yeah. So everybody has heard of something called Akkermansia mesenophilia, right? So
well, if they haven't, tell us more, because maybe not everyone's heard of it.
So Akkermansia is promoted pretty heavily in media and social media as a natural GLP-1. Okay, and the reason for that is the following. Akkermansia is a keystone bacteria that they have now encapsulated in an anaerobic state. Okay, so you can take that and it's an anaerobe. So Akkermansia produces 2 very important short-chain fatty acids, and I'm going to get a little technical here. The one's called propionate, and the other one is called acetate. Okay, and then there's another one called butyrate, but that's not Akkermansia's game. That's other microbes' game, and we'll get back to that. So this acetate and propionate, now you're taking this probiotic, it gets down in your gut and it gets to something called the epithelial layer, which is your gut lining, and it falls onto something called an L cell. And when it gets in there, this propionate and acetate bind to a receptor there. It's like kind of a docking station, and it's called a GPR41 and a GPR43 receptor. And those 2 receptors now produce GLP-1.
Cool. So much so that I was hearing a doctor that I respect talk about people that sometimes get stuck on a GLP-1 journey. They stop getting the results. And that's probably for other things we're going to talk about. But they're feeling stuck when they take the right probiotics, and what I'm hearing, anaerobic ones, they start to begin to release weight again.
Absolutely, because you're naturally producing GLP-1s. GLP-1s have multitude of positivity, right? Satiety, it affects the brain in a positive way because you're not going to have, any of those normal binge-related things. But the other thing that comes with this is the other aspects of it. Now that you have better functionality down there in the Keystone categories, more of these short-chain fatty acids, now the other probiotics start doing their job better. They start extracting nutrients better. They give you better assimilation of what you would normally eat. So you're going to feel more satiated, because most people eat a lot and binge eat a lot because of the dopamine discussion earlier, but also because they're not absorbing and extracting nutrients. So their body cellularly is always starving, according to them, even though they weigh a certain amount, right? So it's really important. I believe that if the microbiome is properly controlled with all the GLP-1s areas, and I'll tell you the rest of them in a second, you're not going to have the cravings. And metabolically, there's about 5 strains of keystones that control 85% of metabolic expression in the body. Do you follow?
Whoa. Okay. That's so huge. Yeah. So let's just say that again, because that's a mic drop moment. There's 5.
There's 5 strains that have been researched of these anaerobes, of which Akkermansia is one. Okay. These 5 strains express 85% of all metabolic factors in your body. So anything that has to do with glycolysis, gluconeogenesis, making energy, burning fat, catabolism, that's what they control.
All the things you need to be able to release weight with ease. Yeah. Correct. And keep it off.
Correct. That
5. Is. Wow. Okay. Well, you got to keep going, because I'm hearing you say that you have developed a Keystone probiotic that works really well.
We developed a Keystone probiotic that we're launching next month. So you're going to have to bring me back, because I can't release those ingredients yet to you today.
Oh, you can't? You're holding... Yeah. Oh, gosh. Yeah. Well, you're definitely going to have to come back.
But they are very similar to the Akkermansia category. All right. Now, one strain I can talk to you about that we've already released is called Anaerobic. That's the one I was talking to you about with a woman that had the allergies, that we reversed all her opportunistic overgrowth. Now, butyrate, is another fatty acid, short chain fatty acid that's produced by these anaerobes, and butyrate. I cannot begin to tell you how many functions that has on metabolism, but also on the immune system, food sensitivities, and gut leakiness or gut permeability or leaky gut, as most of the listeners might know about. So that's actually the one that fixes that. And if you combine that strain with the other 5 strains, you literally have
your gut health works really well, and therefore your cravings go down. Therefore, your metabolism works better. Therefore, you've set the foundation. If you want to microdose or take a very low dose, which I recommend with your doctor, it's going to work so much better because you've healed your gut.
Yeah, but let's say hypothetically people are on GLP-1s, and that's fine, right? Okay. There are certain things that they can also do from a non-microbiome standpoint that will help them. Because look, a lot of GLP-1s create a reasonable amount of muscle mass loss, right? So you want to focus on things that you can stimulate muscle mass and less catabolism, right? Because at the end of the day, what GLP-1s do is they upregulate several pathways to enhance metabolism. Mm-hmm. Now, imagine I say to you, okay, I'm going to give you race fuel in your car. Go drive it as hard as you can. But at no point are you coming back in for a service to me to look at if you're burning that engine to pieces. That's kind of what happens on GLP-1s. A lot of people stay on this for too long. It upregulates these pathways, and these pathways burn nutrients. So you end up being low in B vitamins, you end up being low in vitamin C, you end up being low in collagen precursors, and that's the stuff that starts to affect it. So if people want to know what is the connection between GLP-1s and some of the things that they see or the negative side effects that they read about, it has more to do with what they are burning out and have less of, and those are mostly micronutrients.
Why nutrition is so important and why you would need to test to see how your micronutrients are doing. You can't just take this super dose and burn out your whole system and wonder why you're having problems. Correct. Is there a way to test for your micronutrient profile? Like what do you recommend for that?
Yeah. There's several tests. There's actually micronutrient tests that are out there that you can do a blood draw and see what your red blood cell count is on it. Now there's less invasive things that you can do as well. There's a very specific test actually that you can do, and I'm sure some of the listeners might have heard of this. It's called an organic acid test or a metabolomics test. So an organic acid test is measuring all the pathways that the GLP-1s are really upregulating or the GLP-1s are supercharging. So it's looking at glycolysis, ketogenesis, gluconeogenesis, all these pathways that produce energy and make our bodies burn effectively is what those things are upregulating. So you can see when the body is getting to a point of overstimulation that they might need nutrients. So what we do know is that when we see a certain marker in the test going offline, then we know that there's nutrients associated with that. And that's another way that you can determine if you're deficient in those nutrients.
So helpful. It's so important. And if you had to simplify it for someone who's like, okay, I probably have gut issues. And as you're pointing out, most people do. If you're eating a standard American diet, or even if you're eating healthy, it's probably you're not getting enough fiber. And therefore you have some gut issues. If you had to simplify it, what are the best practices for actually healing your gut? And what if you don't have time to do all the testing? You just want to do your best with the tools you have available to you.
I have said this to many people and a lot of my students at university because I teach at several. I said to them, listen, don't give out the secret, okay? Because you're not going to be in business very long. The secret to health in this country is to go back to eating real food. Okay, like literally eating greens, reds, yellows, pinks, oranges, because that's less than 70% of the population do not eat enough of those colors. And that contains the fiber and the polyphenols that feed the bacteria, okay? So innately in your gut, unless there's a very detrimental reason, your gut is innately ready to receive those things to try and reactivate what it can reactivate. So at level 1, if you eat more fiber, more seasonally, make sure that your plate is, if you're eating animal protein, but there's really good color perspective and it's from a local area, preferably organic, but if it can't be organic, not everybody can afford organic. Eat real food. So it's a very simple thing. If you put it on a table and you walk out and you leave your house for 3 days, when you come back in, is that food bad? Yes, that's the food you want to eat. You do not want to eat the food that looks good after 3 days of not eating it, like Cheerios so that's a very simple philosophy in life.
Yeah.
That's going
like
to
that.
increase it. And if you have 70% of color on your plate, you're already at the 40, 50 grams of fiber if you're eating 3 whole meals a day. Okay, so that's the simplest solution. Now, that's not the quickest solution, okay, because it's going to take a little bit of time to get your metabolism up and get used to not eating a pizza and a Coke every now and then, to get that whole thing, because you have to be pretty on spot with that. The second thing that I would throw into the equation right now is don't go necessarily on lots of fiber supplements and stuff. I would literally go on these anaerobes, right? Because we're all in need of them. And if you can go on these anaerobes, it's going to set the stage for you. So when you start eating more vegetables, to seed it. So please let me just add one other thing.
Yes.
Normal probiotics do not engraft, means that they don't really ever plant a seed. Anaerobes engraft. So the beautiful thing about this is, if I give you these anaerobes, so let's say 3 months, and you eat right 80% of the time, they're going to plant a flower garden. They're going to start doing their own thing. So you're not going to have to take the probiotic for the rest of your life. But let's say you go on vacation for 3 weeks to the Bahamas and all you eat is complete rubbish and you drink a lot of alcohol. Then for the next 2 months when you come back, start taking the probiotic again to compensate for some of the things that you've done. So if you make proper adjustments to your diet and you take these anaerobes and then feed the little fibers and things into the equation, it's pretty resilient. These microbes have been around for millions of years. They want to live, right? They're not inclined to want to die. So if you give them the right environment, they're going to flourish.
Got it. Okay. Gosh, there's so much there. And so where do people get these anaerobics? I know you mentioned Akkermansia, which people can find it. The ones you're talking about, you're developing them?
Yes, no, they've already been developed. We're in the middle of the finalization of intellectual properties and publications and research and that kind of stuff that we're doing. So they're going to be available very shortly. They're going to be available probably within the next 4 weeks.
Really? My goodness.
Yeah.
So you're gonna have to send me the link.
Absolutely, I will.
For where people can find it, because this podcast will obviously be published probably in the next month, but it'll be living on forever. So make sure that, because people are going to want to find those, and also that really cool article and studies you have. I know people like to nerd out on that. It's fascinating.
Yeah, I'll be happy to provide you with all of that for your listeners. So the one that we already have out is called Anaerostipi. So it's spelled like anaerobe, Anaerostips, Anaerostipis. That is the big butyrate producing one that we've published now on, and it's been in the literature. And there's an interesting story about that microbe. So that specific anaerobic bacteria was discovered in babies that didn't have cow allergies. So they literally looked at the microbiome of babies with cow milk allergy and ones without cow milk allergy, and they discovered this one strain of Anaerostipis cacae, which is an anaerobic commensal. And they said, wow, this thing, there's no baby. So they started doing animal studies on it, and now it's kind of, turned into the human trials. And they're actually really helping food sensitivities. Now, I'm not going to say anaphylactic at this point, right? That's a very scary area to go. But if people have food sensitivities, food intolerances, they can't tolerate foods, this is a really good way to start, because it's not so much the pill that you're swallowing, it's what it produces. So it's the bacteria that produces the butyrate. And the difference between that and a normal butyrate supplement is that this thing makes the butyrate once it's planted itself in your gut. So now you have a permanent factory of butyrate that helps the intestinal lining, and that's what gives you not food allergies.
Oh, it's so cool. Gosh. And food sensitivities really cause people a lot of grief. People, I can't eat gluten, I can't eat dairy, I can't eat this, I can't eat that, I have all this bloating. And so just having something that could really get to the root cause of it is so powerful. I want to talk about something that really stood out to me about your background, and I believe it's in your earlier career, you worked as a drug and alcohol counselor. Am I getting that right? Which is such a cool background. And I think that perspective is incredibly relevant right now, because we're seeing that GLP-1 medications actually quiets the food noise, but we're also seeing it impact addictive behaviors more broadly, whether that's emotional eating, alcohol, or compulsive patterns. How do you see GLP-1s fitting into the addiction conversation? And do you view them as a powerful tool, or do you think it's not a good idea for that?
That's an interesting question. I have not heard that approach, on it, because I've been out of that part of the industry for many years. But it would make sense to me because GLP-1s also work on those same receptors, right? They work on the GPR43 and 41 receptors. So it would make sense to me because those receptors have many tentacles. They go into several areas of mental health. They go into several areas of immune health. So they have very long, so there's some immune cells that have those same receptors. There's some brain cells that have those same receptors. So it would make sense to me that there would be positivity in that. But then you can take a step back and say, yeah, but that's also the reason that when people eat really good food and good quality food, they also seem to be at a better mental state. Now, let me explain to you why I say that. When I was in that industry, there was research done at some point in a juvenile prison where they literally looked at changing the diet of prisoners by going more whole food. And within 2 to 3 months, there was less aggression, less anger, less depression, less violence, just eating whole food. Again, the secret is go to school, get a doctorate, tell people to eat real food, and you look really cool. But I cannot tell you how true that is. I have seen miracles in my life by eating whole food. So here's another tidbit for you. I developed a program maybe in the mid 2010s where I brought in, must have been, well over 200 people over 6 months into a program where I controlled their exercise. So I didn't want them to go out to gyms. They worked out 3 days a week. Okay, that's it, no more. I gave them a whole food diet. So I had local restaurants cook it in the locations that we were at, or alternatively, they could cook the foods themselves. And it was literally a whole food diet based on metabolic syndrome, pre-diabetes, all the stuff that the GLP-1's going for.
Yeah. So lower carbohydrate, lower glycemic.
Oh, yeah, whole food. And I actually have this published in a journal article as well. I actually published this whole research. So, I thought I was really cool in those days. So I reversed metabolic syndrome in all these patients, and they all lost hundreds and hundreds of pounds. And I was like, I must be the sharpest dude in the world because, I figured this out. It's only now that I know why it really worked. Okay, and the reason that it worked is that the diet was so diverse and so full of colors that I obviously activated the anaerobes to grow at a higher level. The diet was higher in fiber. So it really had nothing to do with calories or this food or that food. It had everything to do with how these foods generated natural GLP-1s and how those people were then able to be more in a state of satiety. So it's really only makes sense to me now. And in those days, I put it together because I looked at all the research on cholesterol and triglycerides and what the foods are. And brown rice was a big one, and vegetables and Mediterranean diet, as you all know, played a major role in the design of that protocol. But it's only now that I understand what I did to the microbiome. And when I designed the program, I didn't design it around a microbiome at all. I designed it around fiber and colors and food, but not understanding what I understand now. So I've incorporated that into my program still. So I literally have a 21-day diet that was designed, and it has all sorts of vegetables and fruits and colors and very specific eating patterns in it, all glycemically controlled. And that seems to get people on the path of weight loss. So weight loss resistance was a very big part of my practice. It's probably the major income part of my practice at one point. And I don't know if you've ever heard of a condition, Elizabeth, called lipedema.
Oh, I have. And you know what? A lot of people in our community are working with that, healing it. So tell me more and define it for people that don't know.
So lipedema is, so let's say I took in My case study was published on 77 people. So I actually took 77 people over 12 weeks and reversed all this. But after that success of that, clearly I got a lot of people in the program. And I would say about 3 to 4% of the people that came into that program did not have the weight loss progress that the other ones had. And then I started to really dig into that, and I found some genetic associations to these individuals, because I also sometimes run genes on people, and discovered that there's a unique genetic composition for people with lipedema. So lipedema is a condition, for the listeners, of that person that you know that eats 500 to 600 calories a day and gains 3 to 6 pounds a week. And it doesn't matter what they do, they cannot lose the weight. And the more they calorically restrict themselves, the worse the situation gets.
And does it also visibly show up on their body, as lipedema presents as like pockets of fat? It's their lymphatic system that isn't working properly.
Now you hit the nail on the head there. It's literally a leaking lymphatic system. That's the cause of the lipedema, because lymph fluid induces fat cell growth. So if I take lymph fluid and I put it in culture on a human cell, it will immediately grow the fat cell.
Yeah. So just so people really can have a picture of this, because we might be talking in ways the listener doesn't understand. Right. So if you can visually see lipedema on someone, their legs might look like there's large fat deposits, heavy. How would you describe it? It's large. I'm going to
describe it for you in a probably more critical way, right? Okay. So if you go to Walmart, or you go to Target, or you go to any of these stores, and you see a person that you perceive as them eating tons of food, and they just look completely out of proportion, they almost look like a Michelin man, where there's all these pockets of fat, they don't seem to have ankles, they're riding one of these carts. That's probably a lipedema patient, right? And the other thing that you can really look at that is, when babies grow up, they don't have like bones in their wrist.
Yeah.
They look like their hand is stuck into their arm, and you have that little fat puffy layer. Literally, lipedema patients have a similar appearance in their hands and their ankles. So they don't have ankles, they really have just a fat deposit that looks like the foot is stuck in there. And there's a very good reason for that, because lipedema patients actually produce fat cells very similar to babies. And remember, when babies produce fat cells, if a baby produced fat cells during the baby period, in adulthood, they'd weigh 600 pounds, because they're making both forms of fat cells, right? Hypertrophic and hyperplastic fat cells. So it's almost like the body reverts back to that. So it starts to produce all these fat cells. And the reason for that is probably the lymphatic leakage.
Okay. All right. And is it a gut issue ultimately, or is it a metabolic issue, or is it's a combination of both?
Both, but probably systemically coming from the gut. Look at lipedema patients as the canaries in the coal mine. The canaries used to be taken in the coal mine, and when there was, lack of oxygen, they died first. So lipedema patients are literally the people that are most sensitive to salt. They're most sensitive to artificial sweeteners. They're most sensitive to all processed foods. So they literally show it a lot quicker. So it's a massive condition of inflammation. It's also genetically somewhat predisposed, but that doesn't mean that if you have the genes that you have to end up with lipedema. There's 5 phases in lipedema. And generally speaking, when you get beyond phase 3, it's really hard to do anything with it, right? So the first 3 phases, it normally starts from the waist down. You'll see, the changes in the legs and the ankles, and then it goes up. It's just strange. It starts waist down and then it goes the other way.
Okay. And so in your research and work, you're seeing gut health improvement and metabolic health improvement will help lipedema.
Yes, I wrote a hypothesis paper on lipedema as well at some point. I am now starting in my lipedema patients to integrate anaerobic treatment, because I hadn't done that in the past. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. But my hypothesis on that would be, look, they're very permeable individuals. If we can fix the permeability, then maybe we can reduce the inflammation. That would definitely help the weight loss. And the interesting thing about lipedema patients, and this is really a very frustrating thing, a lot of people would look at a lipedema patient and assume, that person is lying, they're eating chocolate behind everybody's back. They literally, the most compliant, dedicated patients I've ever worked with in my life. They literally will not cheat. And when they finally walk into your office and they say, listen, I know you look at me and you think I cheat. And the first thing I say to them is, I know you're not cheating. And that is the emotional thing that opens them up. They finally have somebody that believes them, because what's the point of continuing if everybody tells them that they're lying about what they're eating?
Yeah.
But it's a growing issue, and people think it's only women-based. And there is a hormonal trigger there, right? So sometimes in perimenopause or things like that, it might trigger, but it's also in men, that are very high in estrogen. So I think there's an estrogen component too.
Wow. I literally could just talk to you about, we haven't even gotten into metabolic health. I mean, all gut health is related to metabolic health. As you just said, there's 5 major, what did you call them? Anaerobic Keystone bacteria that'll
85% of metabolism. And the reason that we know that is it's research that was done in Canada on the microbiome to look at specific species and what they express and what metabolic pathways they express. So they figured out that these particular strains that we've put in this commensal, and we didn't just do it for weight loss. We didn't just do it for GLP-1. That's not the intent. The intent of this probiotic is to reestablish what we've taken out in modern society. I always try and tell people that it's the perfect probiotic for an imperfect world. That's kind of where we're going with this. And I'm not saying that that's going to be the final one and the answer to everything, but it's certainly going in the direction of anaerobes. And that's where it should be if you want to fix the gut.
100%. And a holistic approach. I mean, that's what this podcast is. It's a holistic approach to health, certainly, but a holistic approach to weight management, to releasing GLP-1, to stimulating it naturally. It's not just one thing. It's a symphony. Correct. And it all ecosystem. It's something that all works together. We're coming to the end of our time, and I always like to have people be able to apply stuff they learn here. So definitely, if I know you're a busy guy, but I definitely would love to bring you back and talk more about
absolutely
all kinds of things. So, but it felt like a lot of what we talked about was improving gut health and how that can improve the metabolism as well as the gut and the whole body. Are there specific supplements? I know we were talking about it, but if you had to give someone a protocol of what they could apply today, how would you write that out?
For the gut health?
For the gut, yeah. Just to get that gut foundation right so that and they may never need to take a GLP-1 because of it. And I really want people to hear that. When you do all the right things, you may not need a GLP-1. But if you still want a GLP-1 and you want to get your gut and metabolism going, what would you suggest as a protocol?
Well, I'm going to selfishly suggest that they take the probiotic that we're launching, and I know that's a horrible bias, and it comes across as that. But I think hopefully one thing that this audience can pick up on is I've been in this industry for 25 years. I don't get super excited about a lot of things, but this has really opened my eyes. Okay, so one more thing I would say. So you say, what would be the perfect recommendation? Let's say we launch this product in 4 weeks, right? And if you go to designsforhealth.com, all your listeners, keep your eyes open. In the next 2 to 3 weeks, you'll see it on the front page. A new novel probiotic. Once that is there, order it. And at the same time, what you do is there is a prebiotic or a green supplement. Like if you go buy essential greens and reds from us, or you buy like greens and red powder from a whole food store that is like dehydrated vegetables, what we found is that when we take that with these anaerobes, they engraft better. It's almost like you give them fertilizer, right? You're giving them the food that they need to go in there and burrow themselves into the earthworm category, and they can feed off this. So if I'm working with this lipedema group, because that's actually a group that I'm going to do this work with, is I'm literally going to give them the anaerobe strain, and I'm going to give them this essential greens and reds products that we have unflavored, like it has no flavor. You just throw it in a smoothie, you put it on your food, you put it in your salad, whatever you want to do. Take that together, and then we pre and post measure your microbes and see where they come out. So a lot of the work that we're doing is we actually worked with laboratories to see what fiber, what polyphenol is feeding this. And we're finding information that's interesting. And that's the next thing that I'm going to come back and talk to you about. So it's not just all fiber works for every anaerobe. Some anaerobes like very particular colors and some don't. So we're getting to the point where we're starting to understand that dynamic. But at this point, for simplification, that's where I'll start. If you wanted to go with anaerobic, we are launching, by the way, by itself, Akkermansia Pro GLP-1. That is a product that we are launching.
Hey.
So that is one that is specifically focused on everything that we spoke about today. So if you want to go with a probiotic that's working with pure GLP-1, GPR 43, 41, all those fancy terms that I mentioned today, you got it.
Yeah.
Keystone Commensal, you're also going to have that as an attribute.
Yeah. And, and this might be something that we can talk about in the next time I bring you on, sooner rather than later. People aren't talking enough about how to get off of a GLP-1, how to use it as just a tool to get a certain result, to kind of bolster you. I call them training wheels to get you to where you want to be. But the training wheels are designed to come off. And I imagine when you're doing all the right things, as you're outlining, your body's healthy enough that it doesn't need to be on external GLP-1.
Let's get
and not for everyone. So there are people, just again, it's the spectrum, but for a large set of the population, they don't need to be on them for life.
Look, if a lipedema patient comes to me with a life that they've led and they can't lose weight and they tell me they're going to go on a GLP-1, I'm going to support that. Because that person's been running around with 400 pounds of weight on their body, and it's a quality of life thing, right? So I'm going to support that. Let's pick a date. I'll come back on, because at that point we're going to have launch and I can be completely transparent with everything. But I can also share with your listeners at that point, when you're on a GLP-1, I have a protocol. When you get off a GLP-1, I have a protocol. So basically there is these nutrients that I was talking about that you are burning out because you are upregulating that pathway to maintain this weight loss that you're getting. You're burning out certain things. Let's make sure that they are there while you're taking the GLP-1. And then when you go off the GLP-1, there's certainly certain things that you want to do, because there is always that rebound period, right? Where the body is like, whoa, where did that go? What happened? I know why I don't have that artificial stimulation, because never forget, as good as the drug is in its results, it's an artificial mechanism to do what your body can naturally do. Now, it speeds up that process in its defense, 100%. And I'm not anti the use of it for people that really are at the frustration level. Just understand it can't be a permanent solution, because at some point you're going to get to a very catabolic state and you will lose a lot of muscle, and that's not truly weight loss, right? There's a difference for me between catabolic and anabolic weight loss. So a lot of people are like, what does that mean? Well, anabolic weight loss means to me that you're losing muscle as part of the total weight loss. Now, that's somewhat inevitable in a progression, but not at the rate that some of this is happening. That was catabolic weight loss. Anabolic weight loss is more, hey, I've lost a couple of pounds, my pant size is a little bit smaller, my belt size is a little bit less, but I've got more muscle. I don't really weigh that much less, but I look a lot thinner. And is the muscle, everybody knows that muscle is heavier than fat. I've always said to my patients, skinny fat people look fatter than heavy lean people, right? So people with musculature are never light. You can't get them on a scale and say, oh my goodness, you look like you weigh 112 pounds. I have female athletes that weigh 130 athletically, that you would think they weigh 112, just because of the sinewy musculature that they gain, right? So I do also believe the psychology, if you want to talk about that, about weight loss, we've completely lost our minds, right? We have this idea of what we perceive a healthy person to be. And I'm going to conclude it with this. Some of the most unhealthy individuals I've ever worked with in my life, and this is going to come as a shock to a lot of people, are professional athletes.
Really?
Even though they look ripped, beautiful as the physique. I've never seen worse guts. I've never seen worse absorption, especially if they're in the overtrained state, right? Like when they get into the period where they're overtrained and undernourished. And we can take that discussion a little bit deeper. So the visual appearance is sometimes not always the answer to optimization of health. So you can go one of two ways. Do you want to look perfect and get an autoimmune disease? Or do you want to look decent in shape, but not like the Herculean athlete? You know, there's research that's been done on athletes, especially with endurance athletes. And they found that it's a very high rate of autoimmune disease after retirement.
Like long distance runners?
Yeah, like the very catabolic kind of stuff. So
yeah, they look bad usually, though. You can usually, they don't look healthy. So, okay, gosh, well, we could talk about that for a long time. So you're pointing at like people like, I'm picturing like MMA fighters that build all their muscle and then cut weight. And so they're doing
Exactly them. Yes.
Those type of people they might look like amazing muscled people, but they're under the hood, their gut's a mess. They have bad health.
Yeah, let's fast forward the MMA fighter 20 years from now.
Okay.
Let's see what he looks like.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or go look at the bodybuilders, right? And see what they look like 20, 30 years later.
Interesting.
There's permanent damage that sometimes that can come. And then we can have a very long discussion on overtraining, hypervigilance, when your body is stressed and wired, when your body is stressed and tired. Exercising, and this is why my program, I only did it 3 times a week. Exercising every day for the weekend warrior sometimes drives more weight loss resistance than weight loss.
Because of cortisol?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And digestive issues, because if you're in fight or flight, when you exercise and you can't be in rest and digest, right? So you're literally not absorbing all the stuff that you're eating.
Yeah. You know, that would be a good podcast to bring you back on, the right way to exercise, because that's such a big piece in getting a good result for GLP-1s. Gosh. Wow. Man, we covered some ground.
Yeah, for sure. Like you said in the beginning, we'll go in some rabbit holes. When you interview me, you're going to go into rabbit holes, right? Because
those are the best. Those are the best. So again, knowing that this will be to be continued. Tell me what you're most excited about, where people can find you online, because I know they're going to be very curious. And we're going to put all your stuff in the show notes. But tell me more.
Yeah. So again, I'm probably most excited for the downstream tentacle effect of where anaerobes are going to take us in mental health, athletic health, gastrointestinal health, longevity. That's another one, because next time when we come back, we'll talk about fecal transplantation and where modern, anaerobes are as it relates to that whole science. And you're going to see that there's very, very clairvoyant indication that proper anaerobic strains of bacteria can probably help aging process, because we are reinstituting stronger, more vibrant, younger guts, into our bodies. So it's just, that is the thing that is literally in everything that I've done. And I look at everything, right? I mean, I have doctoral students at university level. I teach medical students. I write research papers. I'm involved with the research in the microbes. Oh, one other thing I just discovered, microplastics.
Okay. Yeah. Tell me. Gosh. Yeah.
So
they're in everything.
Endocrine disruptors really mess with our guts. Guess what we're starting to discover is the antidote to that.
What?
Anaerobes.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they hate them. They reject them. They biofilm them and get them out.
Wow.
So might be another component that these things are really good for. And people are going to say, well, you're trying to say that you have this magic thing. No, it's not. These anaerobes are new. It's not new to our bodies. Okay. They're supposed to be in your body. They're supposed to be in your body 10,000 years ago, and they're supposed to be in your body now. So what I'm telling you is nothing new to the ecosystem of the gut. What is new is the fact that we don't have them.
Okay. No one does. There's no way to get them natural. I mean, naturally, you could say it is a form of a supplement because you're putting them in there. But
naturally, we have them through birth and all that kind of stuff. But if you're not compromised, you're going to be compromised, right? So what we don't have is the environment where these guys used to flourish in 200-300 years ago.
Okay.
We can reestablish that environment and then they'll just come back, right? So they're literally hiding out like in hibernation, just waiting for you to do the right things to come out. So please understand that these anaerobes are not bacteria in the sense of the word. They literally like an organ system. They like a lung, they like a kidney, they like a, what am I leaving out here? A heart, they're literally an essential component of what makes your body work. And our world has reduced our ability to keep them thriving, but we are able to somehow reinstitute that now.
Amazing. Oh gosh, it's so cool. And where can people find you online?
Well, if you go to designsforhealth.com, I'm the vice president of education there.
Yeah.
If you Google my name, I'll show up everywhere.
Yeah.
At the University of Bridgeport, Georgetown University, Maryland University of Integrative Health, Notre Dame. I'm involved with most of those schools, from a teaching standpoint. It's impossible not to get me if you Google me.
Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, no worries. It's been great. I love it.